Well, hello. How are you today? Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fishing for Answers. I hope everyone's having a great day. Today, I've got a special guest. We have Chani Cordero, and I'll let you maybe introduce yourself. But she is with the Brooke Army Medical Center, and I'll let you introduce yourself and give the obvious disclaimer that comes with that. Did we lose you,
Yeah.
Chani?
Hi, thank you for allowing me to be here today. Well, hello. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. It's a pleasure. So, yes, I'm Chani Cordero. I'm the CIO of Brooke Army Medical Center. It's a 450 bed hospital, level one trauma center here in San Antonio. It is a part of the military health system and part of the defense health agencies. But as we discussed today about cyber related incidents and discussions, it's all going to be my views and my views only and my experiences. This is not a reflection or um, a acknowledgement from the Department of Defense or the Department of the Army or the Defense Health Agency.
All right. Well, I always like to start with how did you get into cyber? Because I find there's some pretty interesting stories there.
Yeah, it's interesting as I started my career on the technical side of IT, you know, essentially going up to be deputy chief information officer. And I started my career around 2000, 2001. And so during that time, cyber wasn't something we really thought about during that
No,
period.
there
And
was
I
no
want to say,
cybersecurity back in 2001.
yeah,
Go ahead.
exactly. And so I want to say it was around 2005 that we had HIPAA and you got HIPAA security. And with HIPAA security, you start talking about protection of medical data and information and systems regarding to HIPAA. And that's when I started, thinking more about cyber and how do we safeguard. I mean, I remember our networks used to be wide open. I remember, I used to download Napster at work because it was faster.
Well, and the crazy thing
Before
about that
Windows.
is because I was the ethical hacker and I loved those peer-to-peer networking things because everybody's computers were just connected to each other wide open on this network that no one really thought about. So I got all kinds of free music back in the day, but that was about all I did with it.
I just remember those days, and I don't remember even wondering like, was it legal or not? It just, it was just that time period. And then, of course, when the big record industries, came out like swinging, you're like, oh, like I'm not allowed to do this. Oh, okay.
Yes, I mean, well, I think that particular generation, I say our generation, my generation ended up creating quite a few laws as a result of technology just exploding. I have a feeling we're going to see that again, though, with AI causing technology to explode again. That there's going to be all kinds of new laws that come from this.
Oh, it has to. I mean, especially when it comes into the creative space, which is what, and I'm in the same generation as you are, is what happened in our generation, right? I mean, it was the creative space that that rights and intellectual property, was infringed upon, and so we'll see that again, and now in more maybe in the drawing or visual arts or or graphic arts and that community that was safe, right? Like the music and the movie industry, of course, was not safe, but photography was. And now even that industry is going to be impacted.
Oh, I firmly believe that within just maybe 12 to 18 months max, we will be able to go into some app somewhere and say, hey, I really liked this movie. Can you give me a sequel to it? Or I really like this actor. Can you give me a comedy with this, actor? And here's the sort of setup. And just like that, I believe AI will be able to create that. We're already seeing a little bit of it with like Sora's open AI release just this past week. And I mean, it's impressive, and it just continuously is getting better. So I think we're getting close, and we got to figure out how does this impact things when an AI can create a movie like that, an hour long movie just with a simple prompt. Uh,
Yeah, that will be
Interesting.
interesting. I mean, you definitely can see right now, I can tell on, LinkedIn or even articles when AI is used because it's so generic and it doesn't have really any breath to it. But I imagine, again, as it continues to evolve, then it'll start mimicking the way people really talk and the way people really write.
Yeah. Well, I've
Yeah.
noticed a little bit of that with GPT-O1, their latest release. It went from giving me these really, really long responses to giving me these very short, very concise responses, and I find it interesting as it gets a little bit more dialed in, and it's less just word soup, if you will, and it's more well thought out.
Mm.
I saw a Stanford study that was talking about how they were running out of tests. By most, I guess, academic measurements, AIs are getting to where they're fairly comparable with a human, but yet they're not replacing any humans because they're really not there yet. And they were calling for an ability to measure whatever that is. That it's missing because we can't measure it. How do we even begin to approach building it?
Yeah, I mean, I am a adjunct professor for NYU. In NYU's approach to AI, in a sense, instead of trying to say like it doesn't exist and that like don't use it, they encourage the faculty to use it in a way that enhances education and learning so that the students can still grow and develop, but also
Makes
use it as
sense.
a tool to make them a little bit better and stronger. And I like that stance instead of pretending that it doesn't exist and say like just a whole like, you're gonna be tarred and feathered if you if you try to use this.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there were these stories back when all of this first started exploding of teachers using it to determine if it was written by an AI and having it just lie and say, "Yeah, I wrote that," but it was actually written by the student, and so all of this is sort of new territory. But to me, it's a new tool, and so I agree with you. I appreciate their approach of, training those students to use that tool. Because in the work world, in the startup scene, which I can attest to, we absolutely are very big fans. I guess I'm speaking for the entire startup community, but I mean, you can tell they're big fans of AI and most of it. So I have to be mostly right. But you can move so much more quickly with a smaller team, which means you have less likelihood of running out of runway before you get to where you want to be. And so I see a lot of use cases, but to that I also see a lot of threats. And so that's a really good time or opportunity to sort of pivot. What threats are you most concerned about as it pertains to AI?
I think what concerns me the most would have to be the phishing attacks. I think that I have been safe from certain princes from overseas who have, tried to make me a bride and given me like $30 million if I give them my, social security number, which I'm still waiting for that money, by the way. Um, but we never fell for that. It was the older population and generation that did fall for that a lot of times. But I think now getting the information, the data that's already out there, and being able to use that to send to personnel, send to people. So, case in point, I recently read an article where a title company looks like, I won't say the word hacked, but maybe phish. And the hackers were sending wire instructions to people that were closing on a house.
Oh
And they
no,
were
I've heard
telling them
that.
like, yeah, wire your deposit or your down payment, to this number, and it came from the title company. Like, that is legitimate. Like, that is something that a average person may not think of anything about because they are closing on a house. And if the title company email looks like, titlecompany.com, slash India or slash, Russia, you wouldn't think anything about it, right? You would just
Yeah.
you just click on it. And because of, freedom of information, there's so much data, addresses, emails, phone numbers. I mean, when I purchased a home myself, because I'm a veteran, the everyone knew I was a veteran, and I had all of these emails and phone calls, regarding my mortgage and how they can help me. And put AI with that, then I'm going to be a lot more vulnerable to a fish attack.
Oh, I completely agree. In fact, I mean, I've seen the sophistication of them, continuously increase. The one that I actually had to ask a few people, how does this scam work recently? We started getting all of these comments on our YouTube. It was particularly prominent on YouTube, but on the posts that would talk about crypto scams. And in the post, it would say something like, "Hey, I'm trying to move my wallet to a different place. Here's my security phrase. Could you help me move it?" And you go in there, and it shows that there's like $8,000. And so where they get you is that you're not going to be able to move that. They put like a minimum amount on it to be able to move it. And so it's $8,000. They get people to put in an extra $2,000 thinking they're going to steal it and take all the money. And of course, the second they do, all their money's gone. But it's interesting, and what I see is them playing more and more into that human psyche, or the cognitive biases that we all have. And they're getting clever with them, where like even tricking people into thinking they're the ones stealing to steal from them, which I just find mind-blowing. But the sophistication is absolutely going up. Have you seen any what you would think are probably AI generated fish that are sort of scary?
I mean, nothing that would say that's any scared or anything else. I just have noticed, just on my own personal emails, that the fish are getting so clever that they are mimicking reputable sites.
Yeah.
And I have to like rethink to myself, like, why is my, eBay password, or not password, but, accounts about to be closed? Or why is my Amazon accounts about to be closed? Or, name a company. And then I'm like, oh, it's not, because of course, been in this line of work, let me go directly to the site, or directly to the app and make sure that my account is okay. But if you're not thinking, and it's one of those 2 in the mornings, and you're just up and you're already kind of tired and you're just scrolling through your emails, and you're like, oh wait, oh, what is this? Is bad. And you
Yeah.
used to be able to hover like on the URL and it's being redirected to like another country. Well, they can do a tax overlay and make it look like a real URL. And so it's so
Oh yeah. There's
much that they can do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and it's just getting more sophisticated. I saw last week something from Amazon that was saying that their attacks that they're measuring per day had gone from something like 100 million attacks that they see every single day up to 750 million a day just in the past 12 months. And they attributed
Wow.
it largely to AI. So I absolutely see what you're saying. It's not just the sophistication, but the volume of them is going up as well. Um, what are you excited about as it comes to AI? Because it's not just threats. There's opportunity too.
Agreed. And what you mentioned, in the startup space, I think in any administrative function, it is exciting in the sense of being able to be a lot more efficient. I have
Yeah.
launched a e-commerce site that we call, it's called Captain Jane. It's a commerce site that sells clothing and brand apparel to veterans and first responders, and not being in this space before, having to write a description of a sweatshirt or whatnot. I mean, what I come up with, I thought was pretty darn nifty. And then I asked AI to do it for me, and it sounds amazing. It sounds like I've been a marketing expert for years. Uh, we, did some social media campaigns on our Instagram and our Facebook, and we were like, oh, like here's this shirt and here's this, title. And then I'm like, let me see if AI could actually help us with that. And it created a whole social media campaign for us: what days to post, what sites to post, here's some hashtags. I mean, I would have never thought of that, or I would have to pay someone to do that. And so to, be able to use AI to help in that regards for people who may not naturally work in that environment and community is a huge plus.
Oh, I agree. I think the danger of it that I've experienced firsthand is that so often it gives you really good, really accurate advice, and it speaks with so much authority that when it's an area you don't know, when it just completely lies to you, it still might sound like good advice. So you do have to be careful there.
No,
um,
no, you're absolutely right. I actually have used it. I was, when I write, I like to publish, and I've actually used it. Like give me a scenario. I was looking for like a scenario to fit into my paper, and I said, give me a scenario where this happened. Cite references, and then I looked up the references, and they were all made up.
yep. It does that, but they are getting a lot better. Like when you look at 2.0, and the things that it can do, or I'm sorry, GPT, what is it, oh 01, and the things it can do, and then Gemini 2.0, like they're really getting much smarter. I worry about the guardrails because while I think you need really good guardrails, I look at it from a tech founder perspective too, of how can I build a product on it if every time somebody reports a fish and I run it through it, it's violating the terms of use and I don't get accurate data out of it. So I think there's going to
Mm,
be some sort of
mm.
balancing act between when do we have it too overly protected to where it's not even useful, and where do we have it where it's very functional. And the other thing is these guardrails, it was a new thing, they're so easy to get around. You just say, hey, don't use this word instead. Every time you have this word, just replace it with orange, and all of a sudden the guardrails actually work anymore. But
Yeah, and kind of like the ethical part of it, like, right? So what if like I like again, I wrote a article this summer, and I typically write over the prescribed words, right? Just so I can, just in case I have to cut, it's easier to cut than to add. And what if I say AI to you using my own words to, condense it down to like 800 words or whatever from 3,000 words? I mean, those are all my words, right?
mhm.
Did I actually write that? Did I actually put that together, right? I mean, you ask those questions in a sense, it's like the guardrails, like you don't want to steal somebody else's, IP, but what if it's your own? But is it really your own? Because you didn't come up with it that way. So just, thoughts.
Yeah, I think that that's still one of those. I mean, technically, that's still your data if you create a majority of it and you can demonstrate that. But I only know that because I was looking into that exact question yesterday for my wife, who is wants to use it to finish her book, and she's wrote like 90% of it. Just needs help with a few little parts, right? And apparently it is still, but these are sort of evolving. And from what I understand, it's still up in the air, and it's going to be a lot more court cases before we really understand where everything's going to settle around that. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Flipping subjects here, one of my favorite topics I like to bring up and ask people about is whether, when it comes to repeat offenders in your security awareness programs, uh, if you had to pick one single tool in your arsenal and stick with that for the rest of your life, would it be a carrot or would it be a stick, and why?
It's always a carrot. I'm in healthcare, and sometimes cyber can be perceived as getting as a barrier to providing patient care. We have multiple, security protections on our computers and our medical devices. Some medical devices were made in the 80s. There's only two companies in the entire world that might make this analyzer, and it's built on Windows XP. And there's nothing you can do to get either one of those companies to change their technology. So then what do? We safeguard it. We, make it a standalone item. You have to, do these workarounds to be able to get the data from the medical device, to the patient's record. And it creates a lot of barriers for our clinicians and frustrations. And how I try to change the narrative is that HIPAA security, cybersecurity is patient care. It's part of the patient care continuum where you are safeguarding that patient with their data and their health data, just like you would to take care of their immediate needs.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I completely agree. I'm a really big fan of the carrot myself. I have found that Camp Stick is 100% a fan of the stick. They start with the stick. I'm a firm believer that you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, and just that, carrots are proven to work better. There's a lot of behavioral science that's been researched over the years, and when we look at it and we apply it to cybersecurity, it all points to carrot over stick. So that's why I'm
Yeah,
a
I
big
mean,
fan.
no, I agree. And I mean, I think what's again unique for patient care, in the healthcare industry, maybe versus a different like sector, is that majority of our people are in this field because we want to help people. A doctor wants to help you, a nurse wants to help you. And so if they're doing something that's going to hurt you, then they're going to be concerned about that. And so if you've used the stick method, then they're just going to comply for the sake of complying, but not for the sake of patient care.
Yeah, and when they comply, they don't necessarily learn. They go through the actions, yes, but are they learning? Are they comprehending? Or are they just putting in the answer they think you want so they can move on and forget about it for another year? And I think there's
Exactly.
that element too. Um,
Exactly.
So one of the things that I also like to talk about is role-based training, and I know it's a big buzzword we hear a lot about, but we don't see a whole lot of it in the real world. And I'm curious from your perspective, if you're trying to roll out any role-based training first and foremost, it's a lot of work for every new role you want to add. So it typically tends to be a few higher risk roles that get that training. But to that point, what do you feel are the most important roles to make sure that they've got specialized sort of security awareness training within the organization?
No, that's a really excellent question. So, being a CIO, part of, my workforce is that have the ability to get access to a lot of information and a lot of systems. You have anywhere from years to your system admins, to your help desk. But then I have an admin side that doesn't, they're trainers. I run the mail room that may not have the to know or the same level of access. And I like the government has done a pretty good job of finding what role you have and what level of access and that's required to that. Because it support my users. I have 10,000 users or so in my organization. And even if my own department has, various roles from, someone who needs a lot of access compared to someone who needs users. And so I have, some users that are like maybe they're users or super users. Do they really necessarily need, the same type of access? And so I would invite any of your listeners to look at how the federal government does that training, specifically Department of Defense, because that has been very helpful. So if you have a higher level role, you might need Security Plus certification. If you have a role even higher than that, then you might need your CISSP or your CISM certification. And so I think we've done a really good job with that.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that that continued education is very critical and very important. So, in my experience with healthcare, now, albeit not on the government side of things, but in my experience with healthcare, is that it can be very difficult to get some of the doctors to sort of engage in that training because they're very busy, they don't have time. And so, what we found is that the shorter the training, the more we can make it into bite-sized chunks, the better adaptation you get with doctors. Now, I don't know if you've done any of that or if you've seen some of the similar problems, but that's something that we've seen in the past. I don't know if you've have any thoughts there or opinions.
Sure. So we prescribe to a standard training that essentially everyone has to take. But I would agree with you that shorter training is much easier than your standard. Take the do the scenario or answer the questions and click, 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 take the test, fail it, click, 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 take the test and pass it, right?
Yeah.
And as an educator myself, I despise a lot of security awareness training, or actually just computer-based training in the beginning, because it's usually not written by an educator. It's usually written by someone who don't know how to write test questions. And so when you're teasing out what questions to ask, the questions are written terribly, and they're not really pushing the point that you want your learner to know. They're just asking random questions and double negative questions that, like what page was, this answer on. You may not be facetious when I say that, but
Oh, no, I
it
used to work
doesn't.
for the federal government, and I'd start out by helping Alice pick a password or something like that, and we'd move through all of
Right.
these scenarios, and then the parts that I would literally click through until I passed and just click the back button were the ones that would ask me things like that. What compliance framework and what page does this, does this impact or whatever? And it's like, I don't care, and
Yeah,
I'm in
I don't care.
cybersecurity. I'm
Right.
supposed to care. So if I don't care, imagine the rest of the organization. So, But no,
Exactly.
I've been there, done that training. I think maybe not the identical, but because I was with working for the FDIC and SEC, but it sounds very similar.
Yeah.
All right. Um, any real phishing stories you can share? I find that's always a sort of fun thing, just to sort of share and compare notes. If not, no worries.
Yeah, I'll take one from a personal story that I actually almost clicked on a phishing link myself as the CIO. So,
I've
and then it
almost
actually
clicked
wasn't.
myself as well, so I think it happens to the best of us. It was one I created to fool people like me, and then it almost fooled me. So anyway, continue.
Yeah, this one wasn't even with the, with my where I at the hospital, but again, I teach and I teach for various universities. And when, it was one of those, what had happened was, right, is that I actually had called in the help desk. And that day I got a email from that university looking like the help desk, and it was just random that it just happened to come in the day that I actually called the help desk. And I was clicking on it when I'm like, stop. And I like immediately shut I believe it was all my computer, my phone. I can't remember which one. This was years ago, but I was like, no, don't do it.
I almost think we need to normalize it. I think in our industry, we're all sort of tempted to be like, oh, I've never fallen for a fish. And while that's great, what it leads to is our actual users, the people we're trying to protect and train about these things, falling for potentially more of them because they don't share it either. And what I had an interesting conversation earlier this year. A student had reached out to me. I forget what university, but just because I of this podcast itself actually had reached out and just said I wanted to tell you a story about how I fell for this scam, and then my best friend fell for the exact same scam, and then 2 weeks later her boyfriend fell for the exact same scam, and I forget the exact details, but there were like 5 people in her friend group that had fallen for this scam. She was the first one to fall for it, and it sort of brought out to her, and she highlighted that if we were to normalize, going on saying, "Hey, oops, I fell for this," and sort of sharing that information, it would have prevented all of her friends from falling for that. And so I do think that there is some value in saying, hey, this happened, this was how they got me, and sharing that information, because that's what we want our users to do when they do accidentally fall for something. And B, it just, I think, helps make the security team a little bit more human and less of that, that evil department that's always saying no.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. And I had a friend, not in this organization or another one, but they essentially kind of did like a well attack in a sense, right? So the attackers impersonated someone higher in the organization. Somehow they got cell phone numbers and sent text messages, and it was like, hey, it was like, during the holidays, go get these gift cards. I'm really stuck in a meeting, all day. Grab these for me or read me the numbers. And she went and bought them. And I can't remember what made her like not give the numbers, but it happened. And she's like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm really, this stupid. And I said, it was this stupid. Like, well, you got an email who you thought was, your boss or whatnot, and they told you to do something. It seemed plausible, believable. Like, don't be hard on yourself because anyone could have fallen for that.
That's part of the reason I think it's important to educate users about those cognitive biases that they have that cause them to, make those mistakes. The hackers that are trying to trick them, they're very aware of these, mental shortcuts that we all have, and they try to exploit them. And when our users aren't aware of, hey, they'll pretend to be your boss, particularly if you update your LinkedIn and you say you work here. It's going to be the first thing that happens probably before you get an email from your real boss. You'll get a phish from your fake boss. And so I think it's a little bit our responsibility to warn them, hey, the second you tie yourself to this company, you're going to get phished. And they're, often rather complex or sophisticated. One thing that I've noticed is whenever we hire somebody new, they will get phished from me or a text claiming to be from me almost immediately. And it's almost always on a local number. And what's interesting, when it's not a local number, it sort of is, because it's from other places that I've lived throughout my lifetime. But
Wow.
it's not something that maybe that user would know, but it's something that I would know. And I'm like, interesting. They're really trying to dial it in more. And I think that's to what you said earlier, the use of all of the breached data combined with AI is sort of terrifying.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I could see that. I think I actually read that the latest attacks have been from job seekers. A lot of people have been laid off, recently in different sectors, and these attacks, they're sending them messages. They're telling them to download an app, and then that app is, of course, malicious. And they're going off the vulnerability of someone who's, looking for an employment, who might ignore that little red flag. If it was, again, a prince from another country asking for money. But on this one, it's like, hey, I work for Google and we have our own, and our own portal. Click this link and finish your application. Like, we're interested in you. I mean,
Yeah.
you're like, wow, like, a deity has listened to me, and here's an opportunity. And of course, they're taking advantage of people who are already, in a vulnerable state.
That's what gets me the most. I mean, all these scams do that. Like, scamming older or the elderly, or, scamming people who are looking for a job and worried about how they're going to pay their bills that month. But I think the one that really just bothers me the most, because of just how almost how evil it is, if you will. They're all evil, but romance scams, where they're literally
Mhm.
making people fall in love with them just so that they can steal their money. And that's the part that I'm like, I can't imagine. You not only do you lose a bunch of money because you got scammed, but get your emotions just crushed too. So it's I don't know. It's
Yeah.
it's interesting, those pig butchering scams.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The catfish ones or whatnot.
Yeah.
So, a whole TV show about
Apparently,
it.
that's, like, most of the scams that the FBI hears about, like, more often than not, it's, "Hey, I just sent $1,000,000 to somebody I thought I loved," or whatever, so,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
it's
and
a
going
real
back to
threat.
what we were mentioning earlier, is that because they're easier, because they're too embarrassed to tell anyone, right? I mean,
Yeah,
if you're someone that you just, again, it's like the job seeker. You're taking a chance because maybe you're lonely, or or whatever you're going on in your life, and so you feel like take that chance and do it, and then what happens, it turns on you. And so, like you said, not only did you lose your money, but you lost like your hope and whatnot. But the last thing I want to do is like let the world know, like, hey, not only was I on this datingapp.com, but this prince that promised me $30 million really didn't love me.
I've got a brother-in-law who's fallen for the gift card scam now, like, 85 times, so,
Aw.
and every time it's, "Well, you just don't have any faith in people." Well, you clearly have too much.
Yeah, I've had some fun with some of those where I tell them to, oh, can you send me, like, cash at me $20, and then I'll send you 50 to see if anyone actually would fall for that. Apparently, I'm not a very good scammer.
I like the, my grandson told me to keep all my information in a PDF. So, just go to this URL and then just hit him with some malware. I've had fun once or twice, not like so many of the people. I mean, these days, these influencers, they have all kinds of fun with them. I question how much of it is staged and how much of it is real, but regardless, it's
Yeah.
entertaining.
Some
So.
of 'em I get, through social media apps, and I'll sometimes, engage just a little bit, like, "Oh, like, do you still have that green shaggy carpet? Because I thought, you was gonna get rid of it," or, I'll say something off the wall.
Yeah, my wife was messing with them the other day, and they were just going back and forth and going back and forth, and they asked her for a picture of her. So she found a picture of like the poorest looking like person she could find and sent it, and they immediately stopped bothering her, and we were both just sort of laughing about it. But these scammers though, they have like leaderboards and like they are very well organized, and I don't think people realize that when they say organized crime, it's to the level of a legitimate call center that's running with a thousand employees in New York City for major companies. Like they legitimately have the software, the yeah, all the tools, and it's a little bit scary.
Yeah, I mean, if you just think about the millions or, at least, thousands of dollars that it brings. I mean, it's going, this is not a mom and, pop, system. It's, it's not like, some kid in their in their parents' basement. I mean, it pays better than minimum wage. Like it probably pays
Yeah.
better than college degrees. At least
Well,
the short time that you're free.
they took down a pig butchering ring. I think they were on the outskirts of I want to say Abu Dhabi. But they were in the outskirts of one of those Middle Eastern towns, and what they found was that they were just far enough out that there wasn't much police, and they had these massive apartment buildings that could fit like a couple hundred families apiece, and they had like six of them all next to each other, all fully packed. And they were living there, running the operation, everything like all day long. I mean, it was insane. I mean, they even had actresses and actors to that were the pretty ones to come get on camera and actually do video chats with people to convince them it was real. And it was they did a little bit of a documentary on it. It was quite insane, to say the least, just the amount of sophistication that they had. So
Yeah,
um,
crime pays. Unfortunately, crime pays.
unfortunately. Well, with that, we're just about out of time here. But I like to just sort of turn it over to the guest toward the end of every show and just ask, in your experience, what are the biggest tips that you would give to somebody looking to build out their, or to enhance their human security? Any tips that you would give them just from your career that you've learned?
My best cyber personnel have been people who actually enjoy the job. And I know that sounds like duh, but it's you have to be able to stay current. In order to stay current, you have to have an interest in it. There's so many young people jumping into cyber security because it pays well, and there's a shortage, and they're asking, they have whole degree plans on it, and they're doing it because they're not because it pays well. I mean, my team, they read this stuff for fun. I'm not a cyber gal. I'm a CIO and I have certs in cyber, but because I have to learn it, but it is not my favorite topic to talk about at a dinner conversation. So,
That's fair. It's not exactly the most entertaining thing in the world. Although I will say, I've got some red team buddies that would disagree.
I can see exactly my whole point because they enjoy it. Where and listen to my hopefully my cyber team is not going to listen to this, but I'm like sometimes I'm trying to stifle a yawn while they are talking to me about something. I'm like, yeah, that's great. But I'm happy because they keep me out of trouble. They assure the integrity of our organization, but they also are dedicated in what they do, and I do love them for that.
Couldn't agree more. And to echo the point about people wanting to do it, cybersecurity is a moving target. You really have to like what you do to want to spend the amount of time you're going to need to researching just to stay on top of all of the latest attack trends.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Like that is your fun. That's fun for you to, like you said, read those red reports. And it's fun to you to get those alerts from, the various government organizations. I mean, on my wall or on my phone, I get all of the articles. And if I, have something you click on one, then next thing that's all you see. And so when I click on one and it has to do with cybersecurity, I'm like, oh my gosh, and now I'm gonna hear about every bad thing in the world. Can I go back to watching the Kardashians, please?
that's funny. That's great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us. You've given just some incredibly valuable tips. So, with that, that's another episode of Fishing for Answers. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully, you'll stick with